Last time on Richey Teaches History, a giant snapping turtle crept up and took a bite out of New England's...
Oh, this cursing will grab me! Oh, God!
Now that Congress has slain the monster embargo, how will America protect her sailors and shipping from the British menace?
And what about these merciless Indians attacking our settlers on the western frontier? If you ask these guys, this means war.
Yeah, people aren't going to be very happy when they find out there's just a boring history lesson following that trailer. Oh, hey there. Well, last time we were talking about the embargo, which was not very popular, especially on the eastern seaboard. If we look at this election map in 1808, Jefferson's decided to get out of town, honor Washington's two-term pledge. Madison's running to be his replacement. Madison was elected with nearly 60% of the electoral vote, but nowhere near the overwhelming margin that Jefferson had in 1804. In 1810, the opposition to Jefferson's and Madison's peaceful policy of neutrality is coming not from the New England Federalists, but from within their own party. A new batch of people's elected that are called the Warhawks, people like Henry Clay of Kentucky and John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun had grown up hearing about revolutionary heroes who had fought the British for their liberty. And then they grow up and they see America cowering before the British. The British are impressing our sailors and interdicting our commerce, and we're just taking it. Where is the honor in that? The Warhawks would like to see America step up and defend her honor. And Madison is left with this opposition from his own party, but opposition pushing him toward a declaration of war. The Battle of Tippecanoe doesn't help things. Tecumseh was an Indian leader who organized resistance on the frontier as these white American settlers were coming in and encroaching farther and farther on Indian lands. Tecumseh and others decided that enough is enough. And this resistance effort culminated in the Battle of Tippecanoe. The Battle of Tippecanoe got some people even more suspicious because these Indians had been using guns that had been manufactured in Canada. And of course, the logical conclusion is, well, the British must have given these guns to the Indians and told them to kill Americans. Of course, that's it. Must be. As you can see in this cartoon here, it expresses this American sentiment that the British are saying, please, go scalp those Americans, and we will reward you handsomely for it. Finally, by 1812, Madison crafts a war message for Congress based on 3 provocations. 1, the impressment of our sailors. 2, the cutting off of our trade. And 3, the interference with Native Americans on the western frontier. As we can see on this 1812 election map, the war was supported in the South and the West, places that were strongholds of the Jeffersonian Republican Party. But the farther north and the farther east you go, the less support there is for the war. Not only these old New England Federalists, but also people in New York, New Jersey, Delaware, states that count on commerce. They did not want a war with Great Britain. So the first problem with the War of 1812 is it was not universally supported. The second problem is that we weren't ready. We thought, though, that we were doing a pretty good job against the British, but what we weren't taking into account is that the British were just about finished with their war against Napoleon. By 1814, Napoleon has surrendered, and the British are ready to send a large force of seasoned veterans to America. And when they get there, they decide that they're going to go right for the jugular. They land in Maryland and they decide to march on Washington. The British are opposed by a token force on the way to Washington and march nearly unopposed into the city and burn the place down. Now, the War of 1812 is not without its good moments for America. After all, we get our national anthem from the War of 1812, the Star-Spangled Banner. Francis Scott Key was watching the Battle of Fort McHenry. What's really important about the War of 1812 is how it ended. And in an age before cell phones and text messaging and the internet, three things were going on at once. First of all, some old New England Federalists who were fed up with the war have gotten together in Hartford, Connecticut, in order to discuss some measures they may be able to take to stop the Republican dominance. While they were doing that, a peace treaty was being concluded at Ghent. And after that happened, there was a battle in New Orleans. So within 2 weeks of each other, three things are happening which are going to change the course of U.S. history. First being the Hartford Convention.
The Hartford Convention met in December 1814 in Hartford, Connecticut. The convention was a last-ditch effort by New England Federalists to vent their concerns and try to stay relevant. Its members produced a document that advocated amending the Constitution, requiring a 2/3 vote for an embargo, to declare war, and to admit new states. They also wanted an outright ban on conscription, that is, the military draft. A lot of these ideas seem pretty sensible. I mean, if we're going to go to war, cut off trade, or admit a new state, at least 2/3 of us should be on board, right? The Declaration of War in 1812 passed with less than a 2/3 vote in both houses of Congress, which got us into a war that wasn't supported by a consensus of the people. Wanting a 2/3 vote for the admission of new states was just the New England Federalists seeing the writing on the wall. They saw the nation expanding to the south and to the west, and they could see the day coming when there would be enough southern and western states to amend the Constitution without New England's consent. This isn't altogether different from where the South saw itself in the years leading up to the Civil War. Finally, there's the proposal of an outright ban on conscription.
Keep in mind that there was no draft during the War of 1812. There have only been 4 drafts in U.S. history. Civil War, World War I, World War II, and Vietnam. But they did talk about a draft during the War of 1812. So it was the first time that conscription was openly discussed in Congress. And because of this, the New Englanders wanted a ban on this. A lot of things the Federalists are asking for are perfectly reasonable. After all, isn't it a great idea for federal legislation when it comes to things like war and international trade for there to be a consensus? Sure. But what really hurt the Hartford Convention and the Federalist Party by extension was what was at the end of the document that the Hartford Convention put together. They said that if their concerns were not addressed, that 6 months later they were going to meet in Boston to take whatever necessary measures. Very vaguely worded, which leads you to think that maybe one of these necessary measures was secession. Perhaps. They didn't think there was a lot of risk in what they were doing. After all, at the time that the Hartford Convention met, this was a very unpopular war. But this was about to change. Because while the Hartford Convention was meeting, American negotiators in Europe signed the Treaty of Ghent, which restored normal relations between the Americans and the British. The result of the Treaty of Ghent is what we call status quo ante bellum, which means the way things were before the war. We're going to put it back. Of course, without the British cutting off our trade and impressing our sailors and encouraging the Indians to mess with us. So the war's over, right? Not quite. Because Andrew Jackson in New Orleans didn't get the text message. And he is amassing an American army, well, if you can call it an army, really a collection of regular army, militia, even a few pirates from New Orleans. But Jackson is getting an army together to defend New Orleans from an incoming British attack. And the British, who also don't realize that the war is over, that a peace has been negotiated, they unload at New Orleans, and they start marching toward Jackson, where Jackson is dug in on a high place with his troops ready to face the British with wide open ground in front of them. The British approached this battle with the same kind of arrogance which they approached the Battle of Bunker Hill. Difference being that they actually took the position at Bunker Hill, whereas their charge against Jackson at New Orleans is futile. If you look at these casualties, they're very telling. 291 British killed versus 13 Americans. 1,267 wounded on the British side versus 39 Americans. 484 missing on the British side, which I tend to think that maybe they were some of the British toward the back. And they saw what was going on. They said, it's tea time. I'll see you later. And left. And it brings us to 2,042 total casualties on the British side and only 71 on the American side. The thing that makes a war popular is when we're winning it. And that had never really happened during the War of 1812. We never had that big victory, that big knockout punch against the British. But Jackson has given us that. And at the time, we didn't even know that the war was over. So Americans are celebrating this great victory. And there are two results from this. One, a surge of national pride. America! Stop there. And secondly, that Andrew Jackson becomes a national hero, which Jackson is going to be a figure that changes the course of U.S. history in more ways than one. He's going to be the 7th president of the United States. So Jackson is a national hero. America is great. The war was a great idea. Now let's go back to these New England Federalists who'd been assembling at Hartford, who were on their way to Washington to share their concerns about this unpopular war. Wait, now the war's popular. They're not looked very well upon at this point. In fact, you can see in this cartoon, here are some New England Federalists about to jump off a cliff. The other side of that cliff being none other than the King of England. Y'all go ahead and jump. I'll catch you. And this is how these New England Federalists are seen by most people in America at the time, and leads to the Federalist Party being branded as un-American and unpatriotic. The Federalists go back home to New England, and they will contest the 1816 presidential election, but as you can see, they don't contest it very well. And this will be the last presidential election that is contested by the Federalist Party. We're going to see the beginning of a one-party system in America for the next 8 years. As James Monroe is elected president, and we enter into what is known as the era of good feeling. Tune in next time to hear more about that.